Welcome to a new episode of Podcast Infinity. Why do so many people in the world live in poverty for years and cannot escape it? Neither they, nor their children, nor their grandchildren. In May 2017, the famous neurosurgeon and former U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson, tried to answer this existential question during an interview with the network Infrared. He said that the main reason behind poverty is the mindset or the way the poor think. He claimed that if you take someone with the right mindset, strip them of everything they own, and throw them into the street, they will quickly lift themselves out of poverty. On the other hand, if you give someone with the wrong mindset everything in the world, they will impoverish themselves. In other words, poverty, according to Carson, is ultimately a way of thinking. Now, the question for you is, what do you think of this statement? Is he correct? While we respect the former U.S. Secretary, we can say that his words are incorrect, unrealistic, and unscientific. However, this logic is widespread among many people who believe that the poor are responsible for their own poverty. From their perspective, a poor person is lazy, weak-willed, short-sighted, not intelligent enough, and lacks ambition. They argue that if the poor had just a little passion, they could escape poverty. But the truth is that many successful people today come from poor and humble backgrounds. Since these successful individuals were once poor and managed to escape poverty, does that mean that the poor are still responsible for their poverty? This logic is flawed. It's like the story of Ben Carson himself, who grew up in a poor family before becoming one of the most prominent political and scientific figures in America. But again, this is empty and incorrect talk. It confuses cause and effect. Unfortunately, most people, even the poor themselves, do not understand the dynamics of poverty. They don't realize how poverty, need, and lack of money play a role in determining people's destinies and futures. The rich are not rich because they are smarter than the poor, and the poor are not poor because they are less intelligent. Let me ask you a question. Do you think a smart young man from a middle or upper class, a graduate of a foreign university working in a prestigious job today, would have achieved the same results if he had been born into a poor family? Without a doubt, mindset is important, but its importance diminishes significantly in the face of poverty, which can crush any human being, no matter how intelligent, and destroy any chance of escaping the vicious cycle of poverty. Does this mean that it is impossible for the poor to escape poverty? Of course not, but they certainly won't escape it through mindset alone. To understand how they can escape, we must first understand poverty, which is what we will try to do together in today's episode. In August 2013, a group of researchers at an American university published a very important study in an American journal. In this study, the researchers conducted 2 experiments to understand the impact of poverty on people. The first experiment involved going to a shopping mall in New Jersey and randomly selecting 400 people with incomes ranging from $70,000 to $70,000 to $20,000 annually. They divided them into 2 groups, a poor group with low incomes and a rich group with high incomes. They then asked each group the following question. Your car has suddenly broken down and needs repairs. You have 3 options. Pay for the repairs immediately, borrow money, or postpone the repairs. This question was asked in 2 scenarios. An easy scenario where the repair cost was $150 and a difficult scenario where the repair cost was $150 and a difficult scenario where the repair cost was $500. The researchers measured the intelligence levels of both groups based on their choices. In the easy scenario, the intelligence levels of both groups were similar. However, in the difficult scenario, the mental performance of the poor group was significantly lower than that of the rich group. Their choices were clearly less intelligent. This makes you wonder, what changed? They are the same people. Why did their intelligence drop when the repair cost increased tenfold? The researchers observed the same phenomenon in their second experiment, conducted between 2010 and 2011 on sugarcane farmers in India. These farmers rely on their annual sugarcane harvest for 60% of their income. After the harvest, they have money, but once it runs out, they remain poor until the next harvest. The researchers compared the farmers' intelligence levels before and after the harvest. They found that the farmers performed significantly worse on intelligence tests before the harvest when they were poor compared to after the harvest when they had money. So, is money the secret to intelligence? Not exactly. The researchers concluded that the key lies in cognition. Our cognitive bandwidth is limited, meaning there are limits to what our brains can focus on at any given moment. A poor person in the first experiment could handle a small repair cost, but when the cost increased tenfold, their financial situation overwhelmed their ability to think clearly. The same thing happened with the Indian farmers. Before the harvest, poverty consumed their thoughts, causing mental fatigue. After the harvest, when they had money, they were able to think more clearly and perform better on intelligence tests. In short, poverty places such a heavy burden on people's minds that it consumes most of their cognitive bandwidth. Imagine someone constantly worried about how to pay rent, a family man who has been unemployed for a while with mounting expenses, or someone struggling to feed their children. These people's minds are not present because they are preoccupied with more pressing concerns. According to the Princeton study, the burden of poverty makes people's intelligence appear 13 points lower than it actually is, as if they had stayed up all night. This is a reflection of the mental fatigue caused by poverty, leading to poor financial decisions that worsen their situation. The poor are not less intelligent than the rich, as many people imagine. The truth is that their minds are preoccupied with more immediate concerns, such as food and shelter. Some people might say, the poor are only concerned with their stomachs. If they focused on education, they would reap its benefits in the long run. This is empty talk. Before explaining why this is empty talk, let's first define who the poor are. According to the European Union, the poor are those whose incomes are insufficient to enjoy a decent standard of living by the standards of the society they live in. A decent standard of living requires at least adequate food, clothing, shelter, and health care. Without these, people's lives are disrupted. For example, food is not a luxury. It is essential for survival. For children, the absence of food means their brains cannot focus on education or the future. According to a study published by the Nutrition Foundation, the first 1,000 days of a child's life, from conception to their second birthday, are critical. Malnutrition during this period can cause permanent cognitive impairment due to brain atrophy caused by protein deficiency. In a study published in Nature Neuroscience in March 2015, researchers analyzed brain scan data from 1,099 children in the U.S. aged 3 to 20. The study found that poverty affects brain structure. The brains of children from poor families were smaller than those of children from wealthy families. In other words, the environment in which these children grew up affected their brain development. Poverty crushes people and makes them easy prey for what economist Johan calls the biological neural poverty trap. As the poor struggle to survive, their levels of the stress hormone cortisol increase, affecting their ability to think clearly. This applies to both parents and their children. Returning to the issue of education, as we all know, it is a long-term investment. A child who receives a good education enhances their chances of getting a job after graduation, which can help them and their family. This sounds great, but the problem is that, unlike the middle and upper classes, the poor cannot afford to wait. You may be familiar with the famous marshmallow experiment, where children were placed in front of a plate of marshmallows and told to wait. The child who reached out and took the marshmallow without waiting was considered impulsive and impatient, while the child who waited was said to have self-control and would be more successful in life. This logic does not apply to the poor. While those with money can afford to invest in their children's education and wait for long-term returns, the poor, who are struggling to survive month to month, cannot afford to engage in long-term plans like education. This is not a lack of patience, as many imagine, but a rational decision made under the pressure of poverty, forcing them to prioritize short-term needs over long-term plans. As economist Sendhil Mullainathan says, the decisions of the poor, which may seem irrational to those who are not poor, are in fact the most rational responses to a world of chaos and unpredictable outcomes in which they live. In short, those who have not experienced poverty cannot understand it. Most of us, if placed under the same pressures, would make the same decisions that we now consider foolish and short-sighted. This was demonstrated in an experiment conducted by psychologist Anuj Shah on a group of Princeton University students. one of the most expensive and prestigious universities in the world. The students who participated in the experiment were neither poor nor considered to have low intelligence. Shaw created a game similar to the American TV show Family Feud and divided the students into two groups. One group was given a lot of time to answer, while the other was given less time. At the beginning of the game, the performance of both groups was roughly equal. However, as the game progressed, the conditions were adjusted to put more pressure on the group with less time. They were allowed to borrow additional time, but for every second they borrowed, double the amount would be deducted from their total time. Under the pressure of time, the group with less time began to focus on the short-term and borrowed time, even though their performance in the early rounds suggested they did not need it. As their available time continued to decrease, their performance declined significantly with each round, and they ultimately lost. The conditions they were placed in led them to act against their own long-term interests. The people who made these poor decisions were among the brightest minds in America, but under pressure, they could not think clearly. Now imagine the pressures faced by the poor. No money, no time, no health, no peace of mind. You cannot tell someone living in these conditions that their problem is their mindset or lack of ambition. That is empty talk. If the solution is not in mindset or ambition, then what is the solution? In short, people need the necessary help to escape the poverty trap. The primary responsibility for this task in every country lies with the government. To escape the poverty trap, people need to have the minimum necessities of life and not constantly worry about whether they will have them. Otherwise, their minds will be preoccupied with securing the most basic needs, and you cannot expect innovation or creativity from them. Leaving people in the poverty trap only exacerbates the problem. Governments around the world need to invest sufficient funds in improving people's lives, especially the poor. The experiences of lifting millions out of poverty in countries like Brazil and China show that governments played the primary role in these successes. In conclusion, it is foolish to blame the poor for their poverty and expect them to escape the vicious cycle on their own. I have finished my talk, and as usual, I have a question for you. Why do many people with money, even those who have experienced poverty before, tend to blame the poor? We'll see you in the next episode.